Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to another special Between Takes episode of Missing Frames. I'm your host, Shawn Eastridge. Normally on Missing Frames, we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our lives, but on these Between Takes episodes, we do other things. We do filmmaker interviews, franchise watches, all sorts of fun stuff. And once again, we've got the Franchyze Boyz back in action to celebrate the upcoming Batman movie. We're going to go back and watch the entire Dark Knight trilogy. Or not, we're going to. We did it. It happened, and we're going to talk about it right now. We've got, first and foremost, Mr. Brad Gullickson. Welcome back, Brad.
Thank you for having me. I just want to share my dread with you, too. I stumbled over my line. Damn it!
I mean, we could do a take two, or we could just include all of us in the episode.
No, I don't do second takes. I'm a one-take wonder. I was taught that way by Christopher Nolan and Clint Eastwood.
Absolutely. And we have Aaron Prescott. Aaron, let's see if you can top Brad.
Greetings? Oh, man. See, I have nothing.
Damn it. I think so far Christopher Nolan would be very, very impressed with this episode and delighted that we are talking about his trilogy. This is actually kind of a long overdue sequel to the very, very first Franchyze Boyz episode, which was June 2019, if you can believe it. It's been 2.5 years, or a little more than 2.5 years since we recorded that episode. And
it's weird. My life has just been totally plateaued since then. Like, I don't know what happened, but like I've had no development.
You're saying that years. this podcast, being on this podcast, has somehow contributed to your life not achieving anything greater?
Yeah, it's gotta be the podcast. It can't
or
be
that this is
anything
the
else,
and you can't you can't top this. You can't top this.
Yeah. You know, I'm blaming the podcast, Shawn.
Why not? So we were inspired because we watched Ed Wood together, and I was like, we should go back and watch the first 4 Batman movies, or technically not the first 4, but the Burton Schumacher. Yeah, that is his name.
Schumacher. Yeah.
Why am I correcting myself?
Off to a great start.
Off to a really great start. We were butchering everything. But we watched those 4 movies, and I've never been a huge fan of the Burton movies or the Schumacher movies, but Dark Knight trilogy is my jam. Well, I mean, at least most of the movies in this trilogy are my jam, which we will discuss. But let's get into it. Batman Begins. We'll kick things off. So I want to hear, Aaron, first time you saw Batman Begins, do you remember your reaction? Was it everything you wanted it to be? And yes, or I'm answering for you, was it better than Burton Batman? The answer is yes. Go ahead.
Oh, well, we can discuss that later. But no, I remember I obviously I saw all 3 of these in the theater. And I just remember this being a completely different experience. And I think you have to also take this back to 2005 era where we were with comic book movies. And we weren't yet into the MCU. DC was nowhere near doing anything. I'm not sure if they're still doing anything, what they're doing these days. I'm not sure what they're doing.
Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, those things are legit.
I agree.
I thought you said Suicide Squad. Like
I might have said that too. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, agreed. The gun universe is where it's at. But that being said, we'd obviously had a really steep curve of who the Batman character was from '89 up until late '90s when Schumacher had taken control. And Nolan was still kind of this fresh face in the world of cinema. He was kind of he was kind of independent up to that point, because it was just Memento, Insomnia. Was that before then?
He had done The Prestige.
The Prestige,
right?
was that before?
No, Prestige was after Batman.
So he did Batman. Insomnia.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Insomnia.
Yeah, just Insomnia and Memento.
Well, and Following.
And Following. Nobody counts Following.
Yeah.
But Insomnia was his first partnership with Warner Brothers, or was Memento Warner Brothers? I should have really done some Wikipedia.
We should have done research. We're not going to. Listen, you're at home. Pull up the Wikipedia page and follow along, okay?
Follow along. Or don't follow along, because we're clearly not using anything for reference.
No, but I remember it just being a really different experience. And maybe I was a little taken back because I wanted maybe a little more spectacle, and this one leaned more into the mythos of the Batman than anything. But I still really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the detective side of it and the kind of the brooding side of it, because again, what we're coming off of is leather clad S&M biker X-Men movies, and Spider-Man was the only one kind of doing anything up until then. And so this was
Blade.
a real sorry yeah, but that was the 90s, baby. We're in the new millennium. We're in the millennium. And so we're enjoying this new kind of era of blockbuster comic book movies, and this was something that felt different because Nolan definitely has it has a Nolan tone to it, and that only feels more evident when you watch more Nolan movies past this movie and then come back and rewatch it. And so I just remember really digging it.
I do want to say that I wish Will Smith had performed songs for each of the films in the Dark Knight trilogy, since we're
would've been
talking about
nice.
Will.
I wish he would do a
would've been
song for every film ever. Like every movie, I want a Will Smith beat.
I will now open the floor to Brad. Brad, do you remember seeing Batman Begins, and what were your thoughts on it?
I do. The Christopher Nolan thing, Memento came out, and I remember seeing that, and it just melting my brain. I loved Memento so much. I cherish that film, and I still really adore it and revisit it on a frequent basis. But his Insomnia remake, I did not care for at all.
That was a remake?
Preferred.
Really?
Yeah, Stellan Skarsgård started in the original Norwegian movie,
No.
which was a much harder, much bleaker movie than the Al Pacino, Robin Williams flick. I would highly encourage you checking out the original if you didn't. It is a Criterion disc, or it was a Criterion DVD. I don't know if it ever made it to the Blu-ray. So when I heard that Nolan was doing Batman, I was kind of on a I don't know. Then I was attending the Philadelphia Comic-Con in 2005, about 2 weeks out from the release of Batman Begins. And I was attending the DC Universe panel. And when you walked into that panel, they gave you a wristband. You either got a gold wristband or a blue wristband. And I got a blue wristband. And at the end of the panel, they asked everyone with a gold wristband to raise their hands. And they're like, you guys were all getting goodie bags, free comics. And then they started passing out all the free comics. And I was like, oh man, free comics. But then I thought, there are a lot more gold wristbands than blue wristbands in this audience. And then I started to get pretty excited. And then they announced, all right, raise your hand if you got a blue wristband. Move to the door on the right, get on the buses. We're taking you to the IMAX, and you're going to an advanced screening of Batman Begins.
Oh man. I'm glad they announced that. I thought you were going to say they were just like, get on this bus and we're going to send you up. And then you find out once you get there that you're watching
When
Batman
anyone
Begins.
at a convention asks me to get on a bus, I get on that bus. Okay. But the great thing about watching Batman Begins is that I saw it with the most primed and hyped crowd you could possibly imagine. Every time there was a tiny reference to a DC Comics character or plot line, the place lost it. And at the end of the film, when that Joker card got turned, I thought they were going to burn that mother down in their enthusiasm. And the bus ride back, I've never been around such potent passion, enthusiasm for a film. And I think that absolutely colors my opinion of the movie, which is very strong. I love Batman Begins. And of the trilogy, it is easily my favorite. I think it's probably the most thematically resonant. And you also have to remember that, in 2005, Batman Begins, Batman's origin story had never been explored in such a detailed way before, even in the comic books. And what David Goyer's script does, in collaboration with Christopher Nolan's brother and Nolan himself, is it collects all these tiny little strands that have been weaved over the course of Batman's 83 plus years at this point, and puts them into one script. It's the definitive
Jonathan
origin
Nolan
story.
didn't co-write the first one.
So-
Christopher Nolan co-wrote it with
Thank
Goyer.
you. You've got the Wikipedia page up. You're doing the
I'm
research.
good.
Thank you.
I'm good, dude. I pulled that out of my brain.
Oh, sure
I
you
love
did.
this
We
movie
can't
so
trust
much.
you. We don't see you. There's no video here. We don't know.
But my experience was, sadly, no one forced me to get on a bus and go somewhere to an undisclosed location.
I'll do it
But
for you sometime.
Thank you, Brad. I would love nothing more. So, to back it up a little bit, growing up, I loved the Batman, the Adam West TV series. I took that deadly serious when I was a kid. I did not remotely think it was funny. I loved the Batman animated series, and I saw 89 when I was maybe 6 or 7, and I thought, like, I enjoyed it because I was a kid, and I was like, well, this is cool. And when I got older, a little bit older, I kind of drifted from it. I didn't really enjoy it that much. It was very style over substance for me. And there was a part of me that wondered, because I am such a big Superman fan, and I was such a big Superman fan. I remember all the kids in school talking about, like, oh, Batman's so great and awesome, Superman's really lame. And I just would think to myself, well, maybe I'm just a lame person. Like, I just don't get Batman, because people they talked about how much they love the Tim Burton Batman movies, and I had never read a Batman comic really. And I just didn't think it clicked with me. Like, I moderately enjoyed Batman Forever, did not enjoy Batman and Robin. And I just thought, well, this is a character I don't understand and I don't get. It's just dark and twisted, and there's no morality to it. There's no real character there, because that's what had been presented to me. And for me, really, the medium to which I gravitate, to which I say, like, okay, this is the definitive version of the character, quote unquote. And I know, obviously they're great, great Batman comic books, but to me, cinema is you put so much money into it, and it's such a wide ranging appeal that to me, it's like, okay, Superman, like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, these are big movies and iconic interpretations of the character. And because I hadn't gotten that for Batman, or because I thought I'd gotten it and just didn't enjoy it, I thought Batman just wasn't the character for me. And Aaron, I'm so glad you brought that up. I mean, it's hard to go back and think about it, but in 2005, you're right. Like, we had X-Men, and I know Blade.
More importantly, we had Blade 2.
Blade 2 was after. That was 2000. Or no, you're right.
No.
Oh my God. So we had
2002,
Blade
right?
and Blade 2 by this point. Yeah. So Blade 2 came out in the midst of, like, X-Men and Spider-Man movies. And while the X-Men movies were pretty grounded, Spider-Man is zany and fun and campy for sure. And Batman Begins was so, like, intense and grounded and serious in a way that I don't think anybody expected. It had a gravitas to it. I remember nobody cared about Batman Begins. Like, I had to convince, and anyone who's listening, if you went to the Regal Countryside 20 midnight screening for Batman Begins, you have me to thank, because I'm the one who convinced the manager to do a midnight screening. And the conversation essentially, when I asked him, I said, are we going to do a midnight screening for Batman Begins? And he said, why would we do that? Like, does anybody really care about that movie? And I said, well, I care. And he said, all right. And it was a packed house. So you're welcome, Regal. But I just remember having no expectations, I didn't know Christopher Nolan. I was vaguely familiar with Christian Bale. I knew they were serious people, like serious actors, serious filmmakers. And as far as I was concerned, I was like, well, hey, it can't get any worse than Batman and Robin. So I went in with almost no expectation. And what I saw completely blew me away. I was enamored with this film from beginning to end. As you said, Brad, there's no Batman story prior to this that really, in a detailed, specific kind of step-by-step way, shows how Bruce Wayne became Batman. So not only did I finally grasp who this character was, what motivated him, and why he did what he did, and frankly, in a more detailed way than has ever been in any other medium of Batman, but it was finally like, oh my God, Batman is awesome. And how dare Tim Burton make me think otherwise? So I kind of just held that against him for a little while. And that midnight screening, while it wasn't a bunch of, like, crazed comic book fans at a convention, and that reaction I'm sure was crazy, the midnight screening for that movie, you could just I feel like you get a handful of moments where you can just tell like the audience is like, we're all in this together. We're not quite sure what we're in for, but you can feel the audience really getting into a film, and like the cheering, the reaction, the Joker card, of course, but like everything, like all the punchlines and just the excitement of seeing this movie and seeing this really epic take on the character that's respectful and grand, and it just felt so exciting, and it was like nothing I'd seen before. I've seen Batman Begins, I think, more than I saw it like 10 or 12 times in theaters. Like I was absolutely obsessed, and I agree with Brad. I think Batman Begins is my favorite of the three.
Excellent.
I remember structurally I hadn't seen many films that were kind of jumping back and forth between present day and flashback. Is that effective to you guys? That's very much a Nolan thing. Like, and it's not really in the Batman movies after this. Like, he never structurally messes with time.
No, but it is in like Man of Steel and a bunch of other
Yeah.
comic book origin story movies. Like they definitely learned a lot from this structure.
Yeah. The structure of that really lends itself to the thing that Nolan does really well with these types of movies. With most of his movies, is you kind of feel like he has like a vision board of like what this character is and like what this movie means, and in the middle it says fear, and he has like what is this creating, how is this manipulating the character, and how is it something that he evolves and like uses to his advantage by the end of it. And he's really good at really understanding the characters, and I feel like he's less interested in the Batman, the comic book character, and more interested in a new kind of Batman that's more super sleuth. I think he's always kind of been interested in a James Bond type character, and this is one that has gadgets, that solves crimes, that beats people to a pulp. He just happens to do it at night and in pajamas, and but it's still a really interesting way of taking it. And you're absolutely right. With Iron Man and with Man of Steel and other movies, you watch the format of especially the origin stories. Pretty much up until then they had been a point A to point B sort of plotting, and this one did a really good job of showing the influence of this and that. I will say the one thing that maybe took me out of this one slightly is that I never really felt drawn to. I mean, every big Batman movie, especially up until then, it was always about Batman versus that villain. And we have Batman versus sort of the Scarecrow, and mostly the League of Shadows. And I wish there was more of the Crow, which is much more theatrical and something kind of eye catchy to see. And the League of Shadows just didn't really grab me.
Well, he's very
it's
much not doing a comic book. Like he wants
Agreed.
to run away from what Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher ran towards.
Sure, no, absolutely.
And the League of Shadows, like that's the most comic book stuff in this movie. And to be fair, I mean, Batman Begins is. I think it's the truest to the source material of this trilogy. Like it feels like
it depends on the
Batman
source
movie.
material you're referencing.
Yeah, I know
Well,
that's a fair point.
Yeah,
I get that, and I know a lot of people when I would talk about how much I love this movie complained about that, like, oh, it doesn't really have the big theatrical villain or that stuff, and I was always kind of like, yeah, but like my issue with the other ones was like the villains were more interesting than Batman, and this is a character study of Bruce Wayne, and to me, I think the important thing is, as you said, Aaron, I love that there's a thematic through line of fear and how to overcome fear, or not overcome it, but adopt it and turn it and manipulate it into something that you can use to then do what you need to do.
I think the brilliance of Batman Begins is its novelistic approach. It goes the way that like a novel, like a Dickens book would go. Like it, and then when you get to the Dark Knight Rises, it's very much referencing Dickens. But like the way that it's not an A to B to Z origin story, the way that Iron Man is, or a lot of comic book movies after this would be. Like I feel like they often learned the wrong things from Batman Begins, because what you get here is you have Bruce Wayne as an adult, and then you go back to Bruce Wayne as a kid, then you go to Bruce Wayne as a 20 something, and then a teenager, and then an adult, and then like there's a much more zigzaggy unraveling to how Bruce Wayne became Batman than you get.
Well, there's a
with
thought
Iron
process
Man.
to it, you know, like there's a like where Man of Steel, I think it's very clear that it was a stylistic choice versus a thematic choice or story driven choice. Like each flashback scene tells us something about Bruce Wayne that needs to be revealed. Like, you know, you get to like, why couldn't you avenge your parents' death? Then we flash back and we learn about why does he hate guns? Like, why does, you know, what happened with Joe Chill and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's all like, it's organically, it fits the story, and it's really compelling so that it doesn't turn into just like, all right, and then this, and then this, and then this, especially in that first act.
The film is picking the scab of fear, right? So, you know, when we finally do see Bruce Wayne as a boy, and this is an element that is not in the comics, this is an invention of Batman Begins. They take him to the opera, and he becomes scared of the bat costumes in the opera. And he's the one who asks his parents to leave because he's afraid. And in doing that, he takes them out into the city, out into the alley where they die. So because he was scared in the opera, he killed his parents.
Yeah.
And from that fear, it just keeps, you know, they just keep revisiting it. And it, you know, the shame of that fear and how he corrects that shame by embracing that fear and making others be afraid the way that he was afraid in that opera as a child. That is so good, and that is the
It's
greatest
great.
invention of Batman Begins.
Well, I would say on top of that, I would add just the idea, because again, it's hinted at but not explicitly stated ever. Like, I mean, the origin for Batman is he's like, how will I strike fear into the hearts of criminals? And a bat flies through his house or breaks through his window, and he's like, that's it. I'll be a bat, and that's it. Like, it's like there's no justification. And I remember watching this movie, and the concept that Bruce is afraid of bats. And personally, I have a fear of bats. I don't know if there's an official name for it, but bats are like the one thing that really, really creep me out. So I was immediately like, hey, Bruce, I'm right there with you. I get it. But the idea of him being terrified of bats, and then that being the thing that he's like, well, of course, if I'm afraid of bats, that's the thing that generated this fear in me that caused my parents' death. I'm going to adopt that as my mantle. Like, it's going to be the symbol that I take on. That is so brilliant. It's crazy that nobody else thought of that, because like I said, I can't think of a specific comic where it's like, oh, Batman, this is something he specifically feared and that's why he did it. Like, the motivation for it is so, so good. And I love the way they meticulously build up, like, you completely buy into the idea of like this very grounded world where a man would dress up as a bat. How would he do it? Well, he works with the division in his Wayne Enterprises that allows for him to like have this armor and to have this cape that like has a very real world justification. Like, now he can fly. Like, I just love the way we take that time building the character and building the suit and getting every element in place, so that when you finally get the payoff of seeing Batman for the first time, and it's great and it's genuinely scary. Like, I remember when, like, the first time, like, or they're on the docks doing that exchange, and that guy gets yanked into the darkness. I just remember like getting chills. Like, I was like, oh my God, Batman's scary. Hold on, we're getting a call from Christopher Nolan. I think he has something he wants to add.
No, that was my wife.
You're married
There's
to
something
Christopher
she
Nolan?
wants to add.
Yes.
But I just loved the fact that like, I loved that. I love that Batman's scary, and that it felt like such a payoff when we finally got to see him.
I mean, and also I think a stark contrast to the previous films is the grounding element that he makes it, like you were saying, like, you know, he's working with the divisions to make this like plausible character. It was kind of like, you know, the DIY millionaire or billionaire, you know, superhero type, and it was kind of like when like this actually feels like it could happen, you know, like yeah, of course he's got like a tank car and, you know, able to get like, you know, he's purchasing 10,000 helmets
He
just to
climbs the mountains,
he cla
trains with
yeah.
ninjas.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
there
yeah.
you go.
And as you know, which you know are some great comic book elements of creating this fanciful nature, but also grounding it so we can kind of relate in a way. And that was something very kind of new to the comic book movie genre.
I also think that the Ra's al Ghul character, the Ducard character, uh, they use him as a way of mirroring the path that Bruce Wayne was on. And here is a character whose anger and rage left unchecked into a dictatorial vengeance quest. It shows you like, well, Batman's not this bad, you know, because
Yeah.
the League of Shadows thing is this maniacal extension of the journey that Bruce Wayne is on, and Bruce Wayne being confronted with that helps us as an audience kind of go like, well, he knows what where he can't go with this quest, and it sort of
Right.
solidifies the idea of like, he's crazy to dress up like a bat, but he's not that crazy.
Well, I was thinking about, you know, we just did the Star Trek, the Kelvin trilogy was the last episode we did. And we were talking about how Star Trek '09 is amazing, but the third act just gets a little too like action heavy. It's too like, let's blow up the big bad ship. And I was just admiring Batman Begins the way that, again, it's a film. It is a character study. It's about Bruce Wayne and bringing Ra's al Ghul back at the end. And, you know, of course he's going to come back. He has to come back. Like, it's not just like, all right, we've got to beat up the bad guy and save the city at the end. There is a personal story in there, a character motivated story that keeps things emotionally grounded, but it makes it so fulfilling as just a Bruce Wayne story for him to have to take on his mentor as the big bad. That, like, you know, that's, and I think again, Aaron, that's maybe why it didn't bother me that it was more like theatrical. Like, you know, the Joker in The Dark Knight is just iconic, but the reason why I don't mind the more low key villains in this is because I'm so enamored with Bruce Wayne's story, and I love the way that the villains are there to serve his story for the first time in a Batman movie. Really, the villains are there to serve Batman instead of the other way around. And the supporting cast, the cast in general. This is something else I missed from the Burton movies, from the Schumacher movies, but the relationship between Bruce and Alfred, the relationship between Gordon and Batman, like, these are things that are just not remotely evident or haven't been portrayed on screen in a way that is fulfilling. And I mean, you've got Gary Oldman, Michael Caine. It's incredible. And Nolan, when he was casting and kind of in pre-production for this film and figuring out what it was going to be, he always used Donner's Superman as a reference point. Like, Donner had this, you know, you had Gene Hackman, Marlon Brando, Ned Beatty, like these incredible actors just surrounding this central character. And so, like, you bring in, of course, you've got Liam Neeson and all these incredible
Katie
people,
Holmes, so
Katie
good.
Holmes. Well, how do you guys feel about Katie Holmes? I feel like she gets like a bad rep, but she's like she's totally fine in this movie.
She's fine.
Honestly.
She's totally
Yeah.
fine. She is
Fine.
Yeah,
totally
like-
fine.
But how do you guys feel? Like, I mean, Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox. How amazing! Like, Lucius Fox, who's always been a character in the comics, but never given quite the role he has in this movie. How do you guys feel about the supporting characters in the film? Aaron, we'll go with you.
It's elite level. I mean, you could not ask for a better cast. It's funny because when I look at this movie, there's lots of, like, we're talking about the themes, we're talking about even the villains that, you know, with the League of Shadows in this, I don't want to say like didn't impress me, just didn't have that same pizzazz that I was hoping for. And you know, they will I guess, spoilers, return you know, later on, or a faction of them will return in later movies. There's something about the wider scope of this whole thing that impresses me more. And you're right, the relationship between Batman and Jim Gordon, and I'm sure we'll talk about more, but for me, the relationship between Bruce and Alfred was something that really kind of came through on a way more emotional level than I was anticipating, and really enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean they're all great. I like even Katie Holmes is fine, and I like the Rachel character a lot.
Hmm.
But the Michael
Yeah.
Caine, that was a casting choice. When I heard it, I was like, Michael Caine is Alfred. That's weird, but he wins you over so quick. And that line where he echoes his father's like "Why do we fall?" bit towards
Mm.
the end of the movie, when Bruce is, nearly defeated and the closest he's been to despair since he was a child, when he reiterates that "Why do we fall?" and effectively becomes officially Bruce's dad in that moment. It's so good.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think again, like there's an emotional core that for me elevates it beyond anything that had been in the film franchise up to this point, because it felt like this is going to be a big knock, and I'm sorry in advance, but it felt like a real movie. Like it felt like there's a kid. I'm sorry,
The
like
snobbery in that.
I know. I like.
Mhm,
Look,
mhm.
Tim Burton's movies are stylistically interesting, but like to me, as somebody who's like, I want a story that I can invest
It's
in.
still light
I
and
want a
shadow,
character.
man. It's a movie.
Yeah, this felt like to me like
Every
if
frame of painting,
it,
baby.
oh my god, it felt like fulfilling on every level, and things like that, character beats like that, payoffs like that. Like I just remember sitting there thinking, like, in my snobbishness, turning to a friend of mine who was with me, who was a fan of the '89 movie. I remember the first thing I said to him, I was like, "That's a real Batman movie." Like that's like I was like, "This is
Did he
what the
punch you in
like."
the face? Oh,
No, he said, "Sean, you're always right. God, you should make a podcast. You should someday when podcasts exist,
when
you should
podcasts become a
you
thing.
should you should have one and just complain about Batman all the time." But I love the cast. I love is it Cillian Murphy?
Killian Murphy is how
Killian.
I say it.
I mean, he's so good. I think they were originally looking at him as Bruce Wayne, and it just didn't work. But I'm so glad he's such a good Jonathan Crane. He's so creepy and unsettling, and I love the effects of the toxin, like the
Oh
fear
yeah,
toxin.
I love
like
it.
I love
the
it.
way
Yeah,
it
it's great.
looks. Yeah, I just love the like how Scarecrow looks. I love the weirdness, the hallucinatory initiation process for the League of Shadows, all that stuff, the glowing eyes. I really, really love that stuff, and I still do to this day.
The bat monster that Scarecrow sees.
Yeah.
That's the most comic booky moment in the entire thing,
Mhm.
and it is wonderful.
You don't think Bruce Wayne training with ninjas in the mountains is more comic booky than
I mean, it's
Batman?
like I would say it's more James Bondy than anything. That's my feeling.
I guess one of the most important questions is, how do we feel about Bale's bat voice?
I think it works in the first movie quite well. I don't know if I necessarily feel like it works through the entire trilogy. Like
I'll agree with
intellectually I
that.
like the idea a lot. He was
Mhm.
he was doing like this bestial transformation. It makes sense
Yeah.
to me. It's only in like Dark Knight Returns when he turns to Selena Kyle and she takes off and he's alone by himself still talking, going full method in gravel voice, where I'm like, I don't know about that.
It's like, do you want to get lunch? I'm like, no, you should
Yeah.
ask me. I mean, there's no bad guys around.
I get it. Like you said, it's kind of like when he's Batman, he's adopted this persona where he's not quite human. I appreciate that, but when it gets really gravelly, it feels forced. And there's a voice that Bale does between Bruce Wayne and like full on Batman
Yeah.
that's way more effective.
And he uses that more in Begins. And I
Yeah.
feel like over the course of the three films, we get a little tired of it as an audience. Like if
It's
there
a little
were
too
no
much.
other Batman movies after Batman Begins, I don't think we would really be talking about the gravel voice at all.
I think you're right. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about with Batman Begins? I mean, Batman Begins, I saw maybe 10 to 12 times, and I remember dragging people to the theater like, no, it's a real, people like, really a good Batman movie? And I was like, I'm telling you, it's a great Batman movie. Or it's
They
like,
already made the
it's a
good
great
Batman
movie.
movies. Is that what they're saying?
I think, yeah, I'm sure
They
that's
already
what they
made
were
those.
saying. But
They perfected it.
it's so funny just like how hard it was to get people to convince people to see Batman Begins, which was completely the reverse when Dark Knight came out, which we are just
like
about to
if
get
I was
to.
going to say anything negative about Batman Begins, I do think that the hand-to-hand combat action doesn't
Oh
quite
yeah,
work at the
it's
end
not
of the
great.
movie in particular. And I think there are some exposition moments that also don't quite work, especially in regards to the cataclysm that is happening toward the end of the film as well. But
With
I can forgive a lot of that stuff.
the microwave emitter that
Yeah,
like,
and like
oh,
there's the guy in the train station who's like, "Oh my god, it's coming towards the center. If it
Right.
comes to the center of the city, we're all going to be doomed."
Well, final ratings. I have a couple things. What we could do? How many nice coats would you give Batman Begins? How many? How many? How many memos that
Oh, you
didn't
did get
that
the
you
memo.
didn't you get the
Oh
memos?
man,
Yeah. How many?
Rutger
I
Hauer,
like
so
the
good.
audience when Morgan Freeman turned that back on him and said, "Didn't you get the memo?" The audience I was with like burst into like insane
Yeah.
applause. Like it was. Again, this was one of my absolute favorite movie screenings. Let's do nice coats. How many nice coats would you give Batman Begins, Brad?
I give it 5 nice coats. I love Batman Begins. Is my favorite Batman movie at the moment. We shall see what Matt Reeves does. Fingers crossed. We'll see.
Aaron, how about you?
Well, Brad, I agree. It's no Star Trek 3 as you've equated it to,
It's
but
close
I will
though.
give this a very solid 3.5 nice coats.
And I'll also give it 5 nice coats.
Yeah.
And let's move on to The Dark Knight, which is I remember having to kind of pull people to the theater to see Batman Begins because no one believed like that movie was going to be worthwhile. Like nobody thought like, oh yeah, another Batman movie. That's something I want to see. And I remember when The Dark Knight came out, just like the insane, I mean, of course I was excited for it because as somebody who adored Batman Begins, I was like, I need more. I'll take whatever Nolan has to give me. When they cast Heath Ledger, I remember everyone was like, Heath Ledger is the Joker. And I just remember thinking like, this dude made Batman Begins. Like, you don't trust him already? Like, that guy knows what he's doing. And Heath Ledger is awesome in general. But I just remember the buzz around this movie and the feeling of like, this was something when the reviews started coming in, like, oh, this is way bigger than anything I think anyone involved with the film expected. I certainly didn't expect it as a fan of the first film, but I remember seeing The Dark Knight at midnight and just that energy, that feeling of like, oh my God, like we're watching something we've never seen before. It was such a fascinating moment in time, just trying to put it into perspective with the reputation this film has is very, very difficult. But Brad, do you remember seeing The Dark Knight and what your reaction was?
Yeah, I mean, this was one that I actually had some difficulty acquiring a ticket. I did not get the advance tickets the way that I normally do today. So I was driving around town looking for a theater that had enough seats for my wife and myself to sit next to each other. But eventually we acquired those seats and had a great time with The Dark Knight. I don't like it as much as Batman Begins. I don't think it is as thematically sound as Batman Begins. I think its highs are incredibly high. I love Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent. Like, as much as I enjoy Heath Ledger's Joker, I mean, you can't say a bad thing about his Joker. I think because Heath Ledger's Joker is so popular, we forget how good Aaron Eckhart is as Harvey Dent. And
That's
I
true, yeah.
really wish this movie didn't end with his death. Like, I really wished they carried the Harvey Dent Two-Face story into the third film. And killed the Joker at the end of this movie. But yeah, and then, you know, like, again, like structurally, I think there's some things in it that don't quite work for me. I think there's a little more drag to this film than Batman Begins. But I think that could also just be how I was a little snobby at the time, and I remain snobby at how prevalent the opinion is that The Dark Knight is the best of the three, when my heart belongs to Batman Begins.
Well, I agree with you that I think my heart belongs to Batman Begins. I don't know that I agree that this isn't as thematically set. Like I think Dark Knight is if I sound ambivalent about it, I want to be clear. I think it's a masterpiece, but I think I think my confusion comes from, it's not just people saying how much they love this movie, but like people saying this is the best movie ever. Like, I mean,
well, anybody says that about
it- I-
anything, you immediately dismiss it. It's like when I say Star Trek 3 is the best Star Trek film, I invite you to dismiss my opinion. Clearly, I'm living on
I
my
think
own
that,
cloud.
I mean, you look at like, I mean, the top 250 IMDb movies, Letterbox. I think Dark Knight is in the top 10 of both. You know what I mean? Like, it's like Dark Knight is like,
Yeah, but that's because there's like
the
a million people all just clicking the button, 10 stars, 10 stars, 10 stars, 10 stars.
that's true. But I think what I'm trying to say is like the film's reputation versus the quality of the actual film. And I think they measure up, but it certainly is frustrating to have to contend with kind of the overwhelming fan response for sure. But Aaron, how did you feel about The Dark Knight when you first saw it?
I thought it was fantastic. I think you both are whack for saying Batman Begins is greater than The Dark Knight. I think it's an egregious statement.
I prefer Batman Begins personally. I think The Dark Knight is a better film.
Hogwash.
That doesn't make sense to me.
That's stupid. Everything's
Both of yours.
subjective. Just own your love. Own and acknowledge that Batman Begins is better than The Dark Knight, Sean.
I cannot agree with you. It just like Batman Begins is great, but Dark Knight is greater. It's a math equation. It's yes or no. It's ones and zeros. There's obviously, I mean, Heath Ledger's just amazing in this. Like there's no getting around that. So we have an amazing villain, and then we have agreed. Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent is fantastic. Would I have liked to have seen Billy D. Williams take on the Harvey Dent character into Two-Face Zone? Yes, absolutely. That would have only enhanced even more the Burton movies, but we didn't get that. So we get something else here. I love the. Again, we go from a theme of fear to a theme of chaos, and I think that's an absolutely fantastic way to dismantle a creature such as Batman, who is about this
do you think
duality.
that theme of chaos is as strong as that theme of fear in the first film?
I do. I think they're both.
I just don't think it's not attached to the lead. I don't think they explore it enough.
I see the Joker as just as much of a lead.
Yeah,
as,
that's the problem.
Batman.
I agree with Aaron on this one. I think because the idea of like Batman Begins is wonderful and it's cut and dry. It's like Batman's the hero and it's great. And I love, and especially watching it this time, I love The Dark Knight is basically the deconstruction of that ideal. Batman comes in thinking like things are supposed to be better, right? And it's like, no, you came in and look at what you spawned. And the Joker
Michael Caine directly tells him, "You're the one that created these weirdos. You elevated them to the next level. You wanted to punch them, well, they're going to punch back harder and weirder." And first off, when it opens on an absolutely amazing scene with that bank heist, it floored me. Also,
I mean, it's one of the best openings of any film, and especially in IMAX. I mean, it blew my mind. Yeah. I what a crazy way. I think what gives The Dark Knight its edge and its reputation is because it is so intent on subverting what you thought a superhero movie is supposed to be.
But its ending doesn't do that. Its ending doesn't do that. The fairy sequence doesn't.
I completely agree with you. That is my biggest takeaway from The Dark Knight,
and that's why I don't think the theme is as strong. Like I feel like the theme of fear is carried to its logical conclusion in Batman Begins, where it's stumbled in The Dark Knight.
Well, I don't agree with you there because I mean, chaos does ensue because Harvey Dent dies. It's a chaotic ending, which I don't necessarily agree with the ending. I see this trilogy that has the same kind of ebb and flow of the original Star Wars. There, this opening of a new world, and then we have this Empire Strikes Back like giant magnum opus that really, really, truly opens up the world. I wish we could have ended on even more of a downer of like he has lost Rachel, Harvey's just turned into Two-Face, the Joker escapes, and Batman's just like frowning on a pile of rubble. over dead corpses. I wish we could have gotten that moment, Han frozen in carbonite, like just really, kick Batman in the balls and leave him till the next movie. That would have been
it
absolutely
does
fantastic.
do that. I mean, like him becoming the Dark Knight to maintain Harvey's White Knight reputation. That's solid scripting. Like that works for me. It's just, I don't know, again, if it all ties with the Joker's story as well. I think it comes very, very close, and then we just sort of lose it in the last act.
What this movie is trying to do, and I think what the Joker is trying to do, and why the Joker is so amazing in this, is there's no explanation. Batman has spent his whole career up to this point believing like, oh, I understand the criminal mind, and here comes somebody who has no specific motivation other than to ruin all these people's lives. And I think that's what makes this so exciting, like thematically, is the idea of every single character essentially is defeated, and it's only by Batman's just like, I'm willing to take on, in order to save Harvey Dent's reputation, in order to save the city, I will be the fall guy.
Well, his victory is the people choosing not to kill each other. Like he places a bet on the humanity of Gotham and wins. And
and it's a little messy.
Like it also doesn't feel true, especially in 2022.
I don't know. I really like that bit. Like there's something about that to me that does feel true. Like the idea of, it's a little like for the criminal to come up and be like, I'm gonna do what you should.
I love Tiny Lister, and he's great in that.
I mean, yeah. Well, he's great, but it's certainly, I think there's some clunky dialogue in this that's amplified in The Dark Knight Rises. But the guy coming up and just then, like the criminal throws the remote out the window.
The ferry issue is not necessary. The fight scene that ends in the high rise is not necessary.
Well, I think it's necessary. Well, not the way it's executed, but what I like about it is for Batman to become the Dark Knight, to become Gotham's villain, not its celebrity. He needs to know that what he is doing is having a difference, and that ferry sequence is supposed to represent the difference that he is causing in Gotham, that he is having a positive impact. And like, I think there was a way to write that idea better than what we got.
I gotcha. Okay. I like the moral dilemma at play in that scene. Like it's a dark movie. Like the movie ends with like the hero of the story, Harvey Dent, holding a child at gunpoint. And I remember watching the fairy stuff. To me, it presents a moral dilemma that's almost, even if it feels a little messy, is so interesting to me. And especially in the context of like a Batman movie, just presenting this idea at all is like really cool. And I think that's why, like, even if, because I think The Dark Knight is great. There's a lot of stuff in it, arguably too much stuff, especially I get the argument that Two-Face is too much in this movie, but it's all so effective to me that it doesn't necessarily hold it back. Maybe bogs it down a little bit, but it doesn't bother me as far as like ruining the movie for me or messing up the movie.
Well, it definitely doesn't ruin it. It's not a bad movie.
You guys are blowing my mind. This much negativity and hailing Batman Begins is greater than Dark Knight. It's blowing my.
I think The Dark Knight's great. Well, let's talk about the things that I love about The Dark Knight. First of all, I love the fact that we're in. Even though I miss the comic book Gotham City from Batman Begins, I love that Nolan was like, let's just do a crime movie in the vein of Michael Mann.
He's just shooting Heat at this point.
Yeah, it's basically Heat. It's Chicago. I love that the city becomes like a real city and a real genuine character in this film. I love that was a motivating factor for the movie. I love the Joker. I mean, Heath Ledger is iconic. I think want to see a magic trick. We forget just how like insane this stuff was because it's been done to death, and every blockbuster movie that came out after The Dark Knight had the bad guy purposely gets caught so that he can escape. I mean, it was in Star Trek Into Darkness. It was in Skyfall. Like these movies came out years later, and we're still doing the main villain gets caught so he can escape trope. But I love that in this movie. I love the car chase sequence in this film is one of the best action sequences ever. And there are few things that are cooler or more or give me more of a thrill than the moment when Batman, the tumbler has been blowed up and Batman initiates the eject sequence and his little computer says goodbye and he pulls the thing and the bat pod comes out. That's one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my entire life. I adore it so much. So let me get all this out of the way to be very, very clear. I think The Dark Knight's a masterpiece. I think it's a messy masterpiece, but I think its ambitions fully justify the mess, and none of that really holds it back for me. I think my question is like, how do you contend with The Dark Knight as a moment in time, especially looking back on it now, because it's a film that is so beloved and is so many people's go-to, like, oh my God, it's the greatest movie ever, that's where I almost kind of am like, well, then now I want to take a step back and look at it, is I guess where I was coming from.
I don't know. I just see it as Nolan at one of his most Nolan-y kind of moments where, just it has some really groundbreaking stuff and like, integrating stuff that we don't usually see in comic book movies. I'm not sure what kind of comic book fan he would, call himself, if he would even call himself that.
He would not.
I don't think so. But he seems way more interested in creating something that is just visually arresting, and he completely did that for me. And I just think the characters that he's working with, again, I feel like with every movie, I see Michael Caine just inching closer and closer to like some really excellent duality up against Christian Bale, and just what he is doing, why he's wearing a mask, and that father-son relationship that he's taking on. Because in the first 4 Batman movies, it's always been just Michael Gough as the butler, bringing a tray of drinks and some aspirin, and he's out of here. And there is quite a bit of heart and thoughtfulness to it, and yeah, I love the theme of chaos, and I think it really goes hand in hand with that fear, and it just kind of like really flows so well. Again, I wish the ending was a little bit tighter and maybe just cut off a little bit sooner and saved it for the third movie and did something different there. Just manipulated, because I agree with you, Sean. I do like that presentation of the test is there between who Gotham is and who Gotham should be, and the people that he's protecting. Do they even deserve a hero like him? But I'm not sure if it was necessary. There was a lot packed into that ending. But
yeah,
it's
for
just,
sure.
yeah.
Two-Face, the argument that Two-Face is too much, I'll go with Nolan on this. I know Nolan's whole thing is he wants each of these movies to feel self-contained. Like, he didn't want to set up sequels because he didn't want to rob potentially the film that he was making of reaching its fullest potential. So I think if he were to be, and Nolan, you have an open invite, feel free to come on. Don't listen to the Dark Knight Rises portion of this episode, because you will never want to talk to me again. But I think for him, it was, let's not tease Harvey Dent for a sequel. Let's just fit it in here. And frankly, I'm fine with the Two-Face stuff. I do. Really, what you want to see is you want to see him flip a coin and kill somebody. Like, that's kind of essentially what Two-Face is. You want to see Harvey Dent go from White Knight to evil villain, and then you see him flip some coins a couple times and you're good. That to me is kind of the essence of Two-Face. So when people were like, oh, it felt a little rushed, I was like, well, what else could he have done? Like, he flips coins, really. That's kind of what his character does. There's not much more to it. So you kind of got to see Two-Face do his Two-Face shtick. And by the way, the effects work on his face is still to this day so
chef's kiss.
I can't believe this movie got away with a PG-13 rating, considering how disturbing his face looks. Like, and so, I mean, the stuff in this movie is pretty disturbing and dark, but like it's so impressive and it's so unsettling. But like, that stuff to me, like, it doesn't bother me. What does bother me is there's some clunky stuff in this movie. Harvey doesn't recognize the Joker until he pulls off his medical mask in the hospital. It's like, you didn't notice the white face paint.
I mean,
and
he
the-
did just
He was on
have an
drugs.
eyeball burned out.
He's on
Yeah,
drugs.
man.
Right. So he's on drugs. Okay, that's fine. There's also some
Traumatized.
wonky editing choices, like when what's his name? Gamble. Black Dynamite. Why can't I think of his name?
Gamble.
Yeah, well, but
that's
I
the
meant
head.
the actor's
Michael
name.
Jai White, yeah.
Yeah, Michael Jai White. When he kills Michael Jai White, I'm still confused as to what
He
happens.
puts the pencil through his head.
No.
He didn't want to.
Puts
He,
the knife
he,
in
he
his,
killed him in
puts
the
the blade in his mouth
yeah.
in the pool room. So he puts the blade.
He
in his
killed one
mouth
of his
and-
henchmen
Oh,
with the,
yeah,
with the
yeah,
pencil,
yeah,
and then
yeah,
when he's
yeah,
in,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so he has the blade in his mouth and he's telling the story and he says, "Why so serious?" And it cuts to the guy. There's a dramatic Hans Zimmer like blast of music, and then Gamble's dead. But I'm like, wait, did he cut his mouth? Did he break his neck? What happened? There's some weird stuff like that I
He
don't
killed him with his blade.
love
You don't
in
need
this
to think
movie.
about it.
Yeah, man.
You don't need to think about it.
can't
Like, was
be
it a
R-rated.
Pan's
It's already
Labyrinth thing?
close to being R-rated.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what it is. Those are little things that kind of irk me, but that's really it. Like
Sean wants the
Two-Face stuff at
R-rated
the end.
Snyder's cut of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight.
I
That's
don't
what he
really
wants.
need the R-rated version of any superhero movie, honestly. And I think, speaking of R-rated superhero movies, part of what I thought was so inane about the Joker movie is like, I don't want to know where he came from. I don't want to know why he is the way he is. This movie, The Dark Knight, proves kind of how ridiculous it is to try to explain what the Joker is. What makes the Joker terrifying is not understanding him or why he does what he does. The shifting origin story of his scars is the whole point of that. So it just makes Joker seem all the more stupid. But not in this, I mean, not the character, but the movie Joker.
I don't know. I really like the Todd
I just-
Haynes Joker film. I mean, they're totally different films doing different things. But I feel like what's great about Batman and his 83 years of continuity is that it can support so many different types of versions of these characters. And, you're going to gravitate to the ones that speak to you the most. But I think what I like the most about Batman is his popularity, allowing for an Adam West, allowing for a Christopher Nolan and a George Clooney to take on that character. That's what's exciting to me. And, like, if you're going to do a Joker story, I think there is value in going like, well, let's try to explain him. Now, is that ultimately going to be your favorite version of it? Clearly not. But I think condemning the effort of it, I don't know. I can't cotton that.
Brad's so kind. He will bash the crap out of Two-Face, but he will defend Todd Haynes' Joker.
I mean, I'll
ends of
defend
the
any
earth.
Batman movie because I like all of them.
All Batman
Fair
are
enough.
valid.
I don't know. I think The Dark Knight is completely deserving of its reputation, and rewatching it now years later, I still think it's so effective and just as disturbing and shocking and kind of amazing. I watch it and I'm kind of in awe of it. I'm like, the fact that this movie exists at all is really, really cool. So I get it. I get why people love The Dark Knight, and I am one of them. I think it's great. Anything else we want to say about it?
It's really good.
Why so serious?
What are our final ratings? How many dogs? Batman punches more dogs in this movie than any other Batman movie, which should be a knock against it for me. But I love Batman.
He's
so
just gearing
much,
up for
so.
cats.
How many dogs that got punched by Batman would you give The Dark Knight? Brad, go ahead.
4.
Aaron.
4.5 punched dogs.
You cut a
5
dog in
punched
half.
Dogs from me. Oh no. All right. So
Sean, was that 5 for the Dark Knight for you?
5 for The Dark Knight. Yes.
All right,
5 for The
flawless
Dark
movie.
Knight.
All right.
Moving on to The Dark Knight Rises. I'll lead with my story. I saw this at midnight at Tyson's Corner in Virginia, and they did a screening that you saw the first 2
Yeah.
before it led into the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises.
I was in that same theater with you, Sean.
Were you with
Yes.
me? Oh my god, that makes me so happy. I wonder if you felt my crushing disappointment. I felt like it reverberated, and it continues to reverberate through the airwaves, through the internet, through life in general to this day. I mean, obviously, I love Batman Begins. I love The Dark Knight. I have such a love for them because not only are they great films, but they opened my eyes to the character of Batman. Like when I saw Batman Begins and loved it, I went back and I read Frank Miller's run. I read The Long Halloween. I read all of that. I just was like obsessed. I wanted to learn more, and I I so I was so grateful to Christopher Nolan for giving me that, for like really opening my eyes to the character. And that was only enriched with The Dark Knight. And The Dark Knight Rises, I remember seeing it, and uh, about 40 minutes into it, just having this crushing feeling of like, oh no, I really, really hope something changes about this movie or my viewing of it, or that I can connect to something happening, because right now I don't think I like this. There are a few things more disappointing in my life than sitting and watching The Dark Knight Rises and knowing I didn't like it. Oh, like I could have just left it there, but knowing I didn't like it, like watching a movie that you go into completely expecting to love, because why not? It's Christopher Nolan. It's a Batman movie. Um, I just remember watching and just thinking like, I don't like this. This is awful. Why don't I like this? This is terrible. And I walked out of that movie theater just like I was so disappointed, and that disappointment still stands to this day. I'm not a big fan of this movie. I'm not even a small fan of this movie. Aaron, how do you feel about The Dark Knight Rises?
I really enjoy this movie. The one thing I will say is that I didn't get to watch this on opening night. So we were living out in San Francisco at this time, and so we saw that the Sony Metreon, which is like the really huge IMAX out there in San Francisco, and we watched it post the Aurora shooting, and
Oh God, yeah.
so it was a really strange feeling, because being inside a theater, and it was jam packed. It was a huge one. It was because it was this IMAX one, and I always kind of felt my eyes like watching the screen, but also kind of darting at the entrance
Yeah.
way, and it was an odd experience. I'm not really sure I really fully took in the movie at that time, because it was just everything was just kind of, there was an odd, just very kind of crippling, just kind of mood that was going on with me.
Yeah,
I'm not
I
sure if it was
remember,
with
yeah.
everybody, but it was, I felt like I had that. um Going beyond that and just talking specifically about the movie, I once I've done like some rewatches on this one, I've really found to like this, and also I feel like I like it less as just its own movie. And I know, Shawn, you talked about how Nolan likes to keep these kind of confined to themselves, where they just work on as a singular movie. I really feel like he's created a really interesting and really exciting trilogy that's very self-contained, like where I wouldn't want to see another one outside of this. I really feel like
Yeah.
this Batman story works for this specific story. And like I was saying earlier, I feel like the Michael Caine thing really shines through on this one, and him, telling him the story about where he's hoping to see him in the future, where he's like, he destroys his relation, or where Bruce destroys his relationship with his father figure, because he won't give up. He won't give up on the city. He won't give up on doing anything it takes, which means taking his own life in
And
order
he's
to
betrayed
make
by
this happen.
Alfred in the note from Rachel. Like, he is
Yeah, absolutely.
crushed by that
Yeah.
revelation.
Yeah, exactly. And so this there's a lot more heart than I saw going into it the first time, and it really struck a nerve with me. There's a lot that goes on in this movie, and it's also kind of it feels the most comic bookish of all of them. We do have the more comic booky character of of the Joker in the second one, and the origin story in the first one. But this one, I mean, they're going really wild and like turning Gotham into this prison world, this post-apocalyptic, being held at with a nuclear bomb. It's so wild.
the people.
A bomb that has a 5-month timer on it.
Are you a physicist that understands how these work? No, I don't think so. All right, that's a comic book movie.
I definitely am not. But that is
exactly.
dumb. That is dumb.
I really found myself enjoying this every time that I've kind of come back to it.
Brad, how about you?
Yeah, I really like The Dark Knight Rises.
Oh my God.
I think it's a lot of fun. I think it doesn't work on every level. I think it probably has the most problems of the three films. And by probably, I mean it definitely does.
It definitely does.
It definitely does.
But even those problems, I don't mind it so much because I do think that the emotional core of Bruce Wayne is really strong. I think the relationships around him are strong. I think the progression from The Dark Knight to The Dark Knight Rises and where he is, we talked in our Kelvin Star Trek episode and our Next Generation Star Trek episode, how frustrating it could feel that the crew never felt like they moved on the way that the crew of the original series did over the course of those movies. And you definitely feel that stuff has happened between the runtimes of Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight Rises. And I love where this movie opens, where Bruce Wayne is like this crippled hermit who is skirting around the fringes of his own estate as the wealthy of Gotham host parties on his doorstep. I love all of that stuff. And I really, really, really adore Tom Hardy's Bane. Like from the jump, like I love that opening action sequence on the plane. I think it is phenomenal. I love the crazy Bane voice. I love the gesticulations. I love the return of the bastardized version of the League of Shadows. And I like the Talia al Ghul stuff mostly. I think there is some dialogue that does not work for me. I think there is some logic that doesn't quite work for me. I think the bomb thing, whatever. I can just say whatever, Shawn. I understand why that might be a hang up. But like ultimately, I like it as this very big superhero idea of Gotham isolated on this island. They have been separated from the world and taken over by Bane and the League of Shadows, and they've turned on each other like rats. And I just think that is so wonderful. And
wait, how have they turned on each other like rats? Who's
Gotham?
turned on anybody?
Gotham, the poor on the rich, and like they're trying to turn the social structure upside down. I feel like they could drill into that a little bit more, but they get distracted by Bruce Wayne's broken back storyline. And like the final victory over Bane in the fist fight, where I'm just going to end up punching Bane harder and I knock a nozzle off of his face, like that is really disappointing. All right, like that's frustrating. But whatever.
Yeah, I don't like any of this stuff. I do like the No Man's Land. The No Man's Land idea is really cool, and it's so poorly executed in this film. But let me take it back. I've spent more time complaining about The Dark Knight Rises, I think, than any other film. Like I think there are movies I dislike more than The Dark Knight Rises, but The Dark Knight Rises irks me in very particular ways.
Because it hurts your
and
feelings.
I think
Now you understand
it hurts my
why all the Last
feelings.
Jedi people are being such babies. Quit being a baby.
Oh, yeah, it hurts my feelings. It broke my heart. And I think a
It's
lot
just
of
the
it
movie,
has to
Shawn.
do with
It's not about your
no,
character.
no. This is the moment in my life where I need you two to help me pick up the
No,
pieces and
we're not gonna be
try
able to do
to.
that.
I
we're
just
gonna
need
break
somebody.
we're gonna break your
I'm
back
so
right here.
I'm so tired of talking about this movie and why I don't like it. But I think first of all, I really tried to understand at the core what is it about The Dark Knight Rises that I don't like. And the thing that really bothers me at the core of it is Bruce Wayne in general, who in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight was painted as this very obsessive, not quite sane person who has this singular minded battle that he's raging within himself and on the criminals of Gotham. His only real human connection, I guess Alfred's there, but the only possibility he has of a real life is Rachel, and that gets destroyed and obliterated, and he rides off into the dark and disappears for 8 years. I think the idea that Bruce Wayne has been hobbling around his manor for 8 years with a broken leg doing absolutely nothing, and they like throw in some exposition of like, oh, by the way, Bruce Wayne had a project that he did, like a green energy project that was going to save the world. There's a lot of clunky exposition in this movie, but the idea that he spent
There's
8
a lot of
years
clunky exposition in
being
all three.
sad. Yeah, it's true, but and especially in this one. But in 8 years, he's been sitting around doing nothing. I would have bought what this movie posits is like, well, Bruce Wayne never really wanted to be Batman. He was waiting for someone else to take on the mantle, which I thought The Dark Knight crushed when, like, the motivation for him wanting to give up the mantle was Rachel. And then Rachel herself recognizes, like, well, you need Batman. Like, you aren't going to give it up because that's who you really are, which is true. And that's the tragedy of Batman. And that's what makes him interesting. So to have a movie in which Bruce Wayne starts being a hobbling old man, pathetic, and with a broken leg, and then ends the movie literally saying anyone can be Batman. In fact, you kid that I just met, you be Batman. That really, really bothered me. The movie itself is also like attacking any sense of logic for a film. Like, Batman Begins and Dark Knight have been ridiculous, but Batman Begins spent a lot of time meticulously setting up, like, here's why this is believable. Here's how a guy could dress up like a bat. Here's how it could work. And The Dark Knight Rises feels like just there's so many things that I have so much trouble believing. First and foremost, the Bruce Wayne thing. He gets a magic leg brace that magically fixes his leg like 45 minutes into the movie. And I'm just like, what the hell this is one of the dumbest
I don't
things
think
I've ever
that's
seen.
that off from a lot
That
of the
is
other stuff that you
so-
get in the movie. Like,
Yeah.
not that. That's the thing. That's the
A
thing.
magic
That's not,
leg-
It's not magic. It's called in science, Shawn. It's science.
A magic leg brace
He's got a
that gives
glider
him
Magic
flight.
cape that stiffens up when he puts electricity through
How
it.
is yeah?
yeah,
it's
he's
no different from that.
He's Batman. Yeah, a cape that like stiffens when you have electricity is very different from a guy hobbling around for 8 years on a broken leg and then getting a magic leg brace that lets him kick brick walls and like crush them. That's
We're
so
practically
stupid.
there in the science already with prosthetic
Mhm.
limbs. Like, it's not that far off. It's a superhero version of that idea. That's the thing. That's the thing that's going to bother you.
You guys, the leg brace isn't the problem. It's the idea that he waited 8 years to put on the leg brace.
He didn't need it. He didn't need it. He's in Wayne Manor.
He waited
I
8
think your
years.
opinion of Bruce
guys,
Wayne in the Christopher Nolan movies is way stronger than my opinion of Bruce Wayne. Like, if you go back to Batman Begins and you see the shellacking that Rachel gives him when he gets that gun, like, he is constantly having to reevaluate his decisions over the course of Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And when Rachel is removed from him and he doesn't have her really to be his guide, his moral compass at all, he does descend into this widower's despair. Like, as somebody who has been married for 16 years, if my wife were to suddenly explode because of my ineptitude, I think I'd take 8 years to cry myself in my mansion.
Maybe you would. I don't think Bruce
Yes,
Wayne would.
absolutely.
Why wouldn't he?
Here's what.
And I also think you saying doing nothing is not accurate. We don't actually know what he was doing. Now, was he dressing up as a flying rodent and punching wallet thieves in the night? Maybe, maybe not, probably not is what we get from the impression of this movie. But I think to say that he was doing absolutely nothing is not true.
Well, no, the movie says that he wasn't.
He wasn't doing
not
spandex
that he wasn't
stuff.
doing anything.
I know he wasn't doing spandex
well,
stuff.
no, well, that's it. I think like they present the idea like, oh, Bruce Wayne like tried to fund this big project that turns into the nuclear bomb that has a 5-month timer on it. And that's they posit like that's the idea. I would have liked to have seen that as the beginning of the movie, like a Bruce Wayne who's like, because there's an interesting idea.
No, the
that
movie ends. The movie starts off with him being a failure. Like everything he went through in those movies did not achieve the thing that he wanted to achieve, which feels emotionally true to the climax of The Dark Knight. That's my
I guess, but I don't get that from him. He's just like, again, Aaron, you said like he's been through so much tragedy, but all we've seen of him is that tragedy caused him to be like a driven, angry person, but somebody who was driven and went and trained for years, climbed mountains, found blue flowers, trained with ninjas,
and found it to be
and then
fruitless.
Devoted all his time and energy into that.
Yeah.
So, but no, I don't think it's that. Like he basically succeeded. Like he had to take on the blame of what Harvey Dent went through, but I don't think it was something where it was like he failed.
Well, the impression is that we don't have a joke. Like when the Joker's put in jail, the impression we get is that nobody filled the void of the Joker. And so that's not until Bane comes back. So the idea is...
right. That's an idea that I agree with. I don't agree with Wayne being like a depressed, good for nothing like guy hobbling around his mansion. I would have liked to see the version of like that's The Dark Knight Returns, where it's essentially this guy has tried desperately.
That's what happened in The Dark Knight Returns. That's where Batman
no, The Dark Knight Returns.
The
Dark Knight Returns. He hangs up the mantle and he can't resist. Like he has to pull it back. Like he's like he can't stop being
and that's
Batman.
What happens
like he's
in
so
this
obsessive.
Movie.
That's not what happens in this movie. He spends the movie being like sad and mopey. Then he becomes Batman again, and then he immediately gives it up, and he's like, "I'm going to go live a happy life with."
He doesn't
Catwoman,
give it up.
He
doesn't. That's how
he gives it up at the end. What would you describe him at the end of the movie?
He legitimately like saves the city, and he can't anymore. He's given everything he possibly can, and he's realized that I mean, it's very much I think better interpreted by Spider-Man, that anyone can wear the mask, and he understands that the thing that he's been fighting for the whole time has been hope for his city and being a symbol. He has always talked about that symbol.
And he's been trying to get the White
big
Knight.
Rousing, yeah,
and
the
John
big rousing
the
moment is when Gordon lights up the flare and you see that giant bat signal. It doesn't do anything but strike fear onto everybody. Even Bane says it's impossible. And so being that symbol, it doesn't matter who's underneath that, whether it's a hobbling old man that has, can't take it anymore. He's created something that's bigger than him. And I think.
Well, then why is the movie about Bruce Wayne at all? If like he doesn't matter, like that's the that's right. He is Batman, so it does matter who's behind the mask. So that's the problem. Is the movie presents an idea of like anyone.
That's this Batman. I mean, when I was talking,
that's
about
the only Batman.
when I was talking about that in this universe, from Batman Begins to Dark Knight Rises, I think that he's created a much more enthralling story. When I was talking about in Batman Begins, with the League of Shadows didn't wow me. The League of Shadows, having them return and doing something different and still going after Gotham in a completely different manner, and it's kind of displayed in a different way. I think it really works, and it works because the seeds have been planted in one and come to fruition in another. And we've had 8-10 years pass throughout this entire storyline, and it's something that I think completely works for this the longevity of our hero.
I'm not into it. I think Bruce Wayne is Bruce Wayne's boring. He's a hobbling old man. He starts the movie not wanting to be Batman, and at the end of it, he's literally like, he's like, anybody can take this mantle from me, and it's like, okay, so I the idea that anyone can be Batman is an idea that's presented in this movie and this movie
No,
alone.
it's presented
Batman
in
spends,
The Dark Knight. It's presented
yeah, in the Dark Knight, literally, there are people who show up in hockey pads, and he says, "You guys can't come out here. I'm the guy, only guy who can do this."
Harvey Dent. This is what he wanted. This is what he wanted. He wanted people to take up his cause. Now, did he not?
Well, legitimately, like as like somebody who's like a mayor who isn't dressing up and beating up guys, and then when Harvey Dent dies, it's the end of that dream.
And John becomes the extension and the evolution of that thought process.
Yeah, but John is such a bland, like,
I agree with you.
character.
I agree
That's the problem. Is if the movie's going to present that idea, I would prefer it has some level of conviction, and it doesn't spend the whole time coming like. The idea of Bruce Wayne passing on the mantle isn't bad. It's the fact that like the movie kind of doesn't present the idea of Bruce Wayne making any real sacrifice at all in this film. Like he doesn't die, which I felt it felt like a necessary end goal for him, that he like flies the bomb off into the sunset, but then miraculously survives. But it's not dramatically interesting if he survives.
But it's to save the Batman. It's not to save himself. It's to save the Batman, knowing that he can't do this anymore. He passes that facade off to somebody else, and they can continue his journey. Like, because it's,
I guess at the core of it, I don't believe that Bruce Wayne and the characters that's presented in this movie, I don't believe that. Like, I don't believe Bruce Wayne would like just suddenly be like, all right, I want to give it off to somebody else. So I've harped on that enough. The stuff that really annoys me as well, in addition, like that's at the core of it, is Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne sucks in this movie, and it bothers me a lot. But I think the other stuff that really, really just annoys me is I like Tom Hardy as Bane, but I think it's so goofy that Bane just ends up basically being the henchman to Talia al Ghul. And it's very, very goofy that Miranda Tate is a love interest that's, again, like they sleep together. That comes out of nowhere. It's not remotely prompted or justified by anything in this movie. Feels like a romantic subplot that just comes out of nowhere. And then when at the twist at the end, when she's like, I'm Talia al Ghul, I'm like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. There's a part of me that wants to see Bruce humbled in a way. So when you start the movie with him being humbled and hobbling and depressed, it's not as storytelling wise, it's not as interesting when Bane beats the crap out of him and breaks his back. Like, if we start the movie with a Bruce Wayne, like, it's like, well, of course he broke his back. He's spent 8 years hobbling around a mansion, not doing any push-ups, just being sad and mopey. So when he goes out and Bane beats him up, you're like, well, of course that would happen. There's no drama to it. You're like, that's what's expected. It would have been nicer. And they try to plant the idea that Bruce was like a little arrogant, but I don't buy it because, again, it's not justified by the content of the film. You don't say like this guy is arrogant and proud and like he's going to get his ass handed to him when he spent 8 years not training, not doing anything remotely Batman related, and then rushes out, and we expect there to be some level of, I don't know, like payoff to that or tragedy to it. It just felt like
we expect him to be broken. Like from the trailer, you know he's going to be broken. Like the whole first third of the movie is about taking him to his lowest point. And, you know, I think all of these things would not be an issue if the script was just better written. Like, the problem of this movie is that its script is it's a swing and a miss script on so many of these conversations. It's so much of it is idea but no depth.
That's the problem. And it's like, again, for me, in a trilogy where it's like you have the same creative team, you have two, for me, masterpieces, and then to kind of like, there's a cynicism to Dark Knight Rises where I almost feel Nolan saying, well, I don't really care. Let's just get it over with. And it's imbued in a lot of what you're saying, Brad, the laziness of the choices, the fact that there's no, like, again, you have Bruce start off the movie like maybe he's like desperate to get back to Batman. He's been training and he's been honing his body. He's just been waiting for the moment so that when Alfred calls him out on that and says, you've just been waiting for something to go bad again, you're not living your life, it makes more sense. And then you have a Batman at peak performance, a Bruce Wayne at peak performance who's been obsessively like honing his body, preparing himself for that moment. And then Bane destroys him. That's so much more interesting to me. It's simple. Like, it just doesn't make sense that somebody didn't think to say, like, oh yeah, that's kind of
I
weird
think
that we
the
haven't.
important words in that sentence is to you, though, like to me.
Yeah.
And
Well,
like
that's
to
what
me, that's
that's
not
why
the
I say it.
case. You know, like I find it interesting how it sets him up and then crushes him. That's not necessarily what I was saying, though. Like, I think just like the basic, like the attention to the way people speak to each other in this film is off. And I think that's because the attention is elsewhere for Nolan. I don't think he is as engaged with it thematically or narratively the way he was in the past two. I think he is much more interested in, I have more money than God now, and I can do insane things. And so you look
Yeah.
at the action of this movie, you look at that opening sequence, you look at the amount of production design and extras in this film, and it's this insane cinematic feat. Like, we have not seen sets like this since the silent era. It's bonkers. And I think that's where he loses himself. And I kind of also go with him on that too, because it is awe-inspiring as a film watcher.
I agree. Nolan has always, and even up until Tenet, he has always been a visual director. It has been his focus. He's always made these amazingly slick-looking movies, and nearly every bit of dialogue that's in a Nolan movie is exposition. Whether you can hear it or not, that's a different tale. But it's always an exposition piece of trying to get information just to get from scene to scene, and never really feeling like you're fully invested in what they're saying. But I like what is being said. And I like the trajectory of having this flawed character that didn't think things through, or is hobbling around because he's a broken man. He is a broken individual that feels aimless at times, and feels like there's nothing really for him. I don't think he truly understands what the people in his life, the very few of them left, have meant to him. And having Rachel gone, and Alfred the only one remaining, and I don't know. I like the big set pieces and the big kind of pompous arrogance that Nolan has to create these scenes of stadiums blowing up, and a whole bunch of underground cops that have been doing nothing for 5 months, and then come out and
guys,
guys
listen.
with
3,000 cops. 3,000 cops go underground into the sewers and get trapped for 5 months. That is so stupid. That is so stupid.
You say this about a movie of a man dressed up as a bat. Like, it's like, how stupid is it?
But that's what but that's the point, is that Batman Begins went out of its way to justify that character. It went out of its way.
There's an island in the middle of the city called the Narrows, where they put all the poor people. Like, that's
perfectly fine and normal. I mean, that's something that exists in large cities in general. I'm saying that this movie makes so many stupid decisions that it goes so far. And in a film that is so self-serious, and films that have been up to this point, like Dark Knight and Batman Begins, even despite their flaws and the things that don't make sense and are like goofy, like the movies go out of their way to kind of have explanations and justifications for what happens. So when these things go on and it's like Batman, he has a protruding vertebrae and the guy punches him in the back and he does a bunch of push-ups and then he can defeat Bane, or something where a bunch of guys and again, the passage of time is so skewed in this movie. 1 second it's like, all right, the bomb's going to go off in 5 months. And then literally 2 scenes later, they're like, all right, tomorrow's the day it's going to go off. I'm like, what the hell is happening? Like, these movies went out of their way to say, take us seriously. And this movie just completely throws that all away. And I'm somebody who loves goofy. I can take some camp. I love Roger Moore Bond. Like, I'm okay with it. But for a movie that has insisted on its own self-seriousness and masterful status as true cinema, to go in this direction and to do things that just make absolutely no sense. It felt like I was just getting knocked down by wave after wave of stupidity. I'm like, guys, wait, I haven't recovered from the last one. Wait, how does Joseph Gordon-Levitt know that Bruce Wayne's Batman? Because they're both orphans, and he walked up to the house and said, I'm going to get a warrant for the death of Harvey Dent. And Alfred was like, well, I better let this guy inside, somebody I've never met. Like, it's just
I completely get why he thought he was Batman. I was really shocked that more people weren't getting that he was
because
Batman
of the orphan
more.
look. Like, he's like, I saw that orphan look in your eyes. Like, if somebody had said, wait a second, Batman and Bruce Wayne, when Batman appeared in town, it wasn't that long after Bruce Wayne returned after years away. And then you add the justification of like, I know what it's like not to have parents. I know that. Like, you could have had a slightly more logical explanation, but the movie, I think, Brad, you touched on it. Nolan's not that interested in it. Frankly, it feels like he just wants to get this off his plate. And that's what disappoints me about it, is that the same care that went into crafting the story and the characters of the first two films is not in this movie. And then this movie goes out of its way to make these incredibly dumb decisions that I'm just like, narratively, this doesn't make sense. But also, it's like insulting. I to have to sit here and watch it.
I think maybe my problem is that I never took the first one that serious. I found it as more of a plausible style and a different tone, but I didn't take it as like necessarily overtly serious, as if like, it wasn't still, a Batman character and, somebody trying to put crazy poison into the water system. I still found it as like, this is still a pretty wild tale. And, there's a flying monster bat, flying over the poor people right now. Yeah, and so it really, I honestly just felt like it all kind of flowed. There are definitely highs and lows all over the movies, but it felt to, kind of be in the same vein as everything else. A little more, bombastic, but still, I still found it enjoyable.
Did you guys like the Robin reveal at the end of the movie? You should use your real name, Robin.
I thought that was cute.
Yeah, it's cute.
No, it's not good. It's not good.
It was cute.
Good. That's what I'm saying. It is a dumb moment in a
it
dumb
is.
movie.
None of his lines flow like human beings are speaking them. It definitely sounds like somebody made like a Batman AI script reader and spit it out and it was like, oh, these are the things that a Batman movie is supposed to say. I completely agree with you.
Let me try to tip the scales back, because I very clearly don't like this movie. But as far as things I do like, I like that Nolan told the story, if that makes sense. Like, I like that he completed the trilogy. I know he was very like, I don't know if I want to commit to sequels and but I like that there's a definitive cinematic statement from one of our great living filmmakers on a pop culture character like this. I think that's awesome.
He just shits the bed.
Yeah, he does. I mean, I've gone on and on about that. So let me try to be nice. Don't encourage me, Brad. Let me try to be nice to this movie now. Practical stuff, like you said, the scale of it is insane. The devotion to practical effects is really, really exciting. Even though I don't particularly like the action in this film, I like the Bane Batman fight to a certain extent. Like, I think there is this desperation to Batman just realizing like he's in over his head. That's really exciting to watch and that we haven't seen before. Although I think the prison stuff is utterly dumb. Can nobody take a running start off that ledge? Like, they all have to jump from the end. Okay, I'm sorry. But I like the idea of Batman being trapped in like a hell and like climbing out of the well, and the visual motif matching up with like his being at the bottom of the well as a kid when his dad saves him. I like the moment where the bats fly out and gives him the little extra push he needs to take that jump. Tom Hardy as Bane. Tom Hardy's great. I appreciate the devotion to the commitment, I guess I should say, to the voice and that. I just wish Bane had been a more exciting character and that he hadn't just been a henchman for Talia al Ghul's big reveal at the end. That really bugs me so much. That Batman comes back, punches him his mask in the exact right spot this time, and then it's just like Bane's not the bad guy, it's Talia al Ghul, and Bane, for me, it robs Bane of all his power at the end. See, I can't do it. I'm drifting back into complaints. I'm so sorry. I like that Cillian Murphy's in this, even though I hate the stuff that he is doing in this movie.
Sad. So good in it.
Guys, what else? You guys talk about the things you like, because I can't. There are things I don't like this movie.
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, like, I like almost all of the ideas. I just find the execution in this film very frustrating. But I do feel like it is a decent conclusion based on what we got with Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Like, this does feel like a whole piece for me, and I do.
I like that the League of
revisiting
Shadows.
it.
They bring the League of Shadows back. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and like I said, I really enjoy Tom Hardy as Bane. I think every moment he's on screen, the movie gets better.
Anne Hathaway. How do we feel about Anne Hathaway?
I think she's great in it.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't like her either.
Yeah.
Are you one of those people that hates Anne Hathaway and everything? Because I feel like that was a thing a couple years ago, and I was like, wait, really?
No, I get what because I do remember that. But in particular, I think the way she plays Selena Kyle, it's like, oh yeah, that's like the emo girl I had a crush on when I was 15 years old. Like everything she does is just like very like, ugh, I can't deal with this, over it. And the idea that the two of them run off together. The woman betrays him. She literally brings him to his death.
No, she Lando Calrissian'd him. All right.
She brings She brings him, like, she's like, when she watches that fight play out, as if she's acting
Bane.
remote.
He wanted to find Bane. She brought him to her. He just happened to close a gate. What did she do? She Lando Calrissian'd him.
She basically was like, sorry, and he goes, you've made a terrible mistake, Selena. And like, and so the implication is that she betrayed him, and then she watches the fight play out and it's like, oh my god, that's terrible. It's like, well, what did you think was going to happen? And then Bruce Wayne comes back, finds her, and says, nah, I think you got a heart of gold. And I'm like, the woman who betrayed you to your death has a heart of gold, and then you're going to run off with her at the end. Oh, I hate this movie so much. I'm so sorry.
It could just be having a dinner.
But I like The Dark Knight Rises stretches credibility as far as plot, story, and character motivations past the breaking point. For me, I'm like, yes, toxin that you blast into the air using a microwave emitter, sure, that's a James Bond thing. I'm here for it. Batman has to save the day. But a movie in which like that takes itself so seriously, that has a man getting punched in the back to fix his broken spine, and then 3,000 cops being trapped in the sewers for 5 months while a giant bomb counts down. Like, it's too much. And then Talia al Ghul, that reveal, somebody needs to psychoanalyze me, but I think what it is just my overall disappointment and feeling of like, somebody who created the first two movies should not have created this movie. I don't like, to me, I watch this and I'm like, this is not the same. It's like a Spider-Man 3 situation, except Spider-Man 3, I felt like its heart was in the right place, where this just feels kind of like Nolan's like, I got to get on to Dunkirk. I got to go make Interstellar. I got to get this Batman nonsense off my plate. I think that's what he did. I think, Aaron, when you say like, oh, it's a guy who dresses up like a bat, like how seriously can you take it? I think that's how Nolan approached The Dark Knight Rises. He's like, this stuff is kind of goofy, isn't it? And I'm like, no, you made me believe in this. In two great movies, you spent a lot of time making me believe and buy into this and love this character. So for you to kind of cop out and say like, this is how it ends, I'm like, no, I don't want it. I don't like it. That's my piece. That's my depressing. This is how we're going to end our Dark Knight trilogy episode. Are we done with The Dark Knight Rises? Is there anything else? Is there anything else we want to say about it? Any final words to put in for The Dark Knight Rises before we do final ratings? And I promise we're going to end on a brighter note than this.
I liked it.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I want to point out, if Batman had looked at the camera and said, some days you just can't get rid of a bomb, while he was flying off into the sunset, I would have given it more credit. Final ratings. What do we want to do? Do we want to do giant bombs? Broken backs? Protruding vertebrae? What do you guys want to do? How many broken backs would you give The Dark Knight Rises, Aaron?
I'm giving it 3.5 broken backs. Bats or back? Which
one? Both
bats.
Work. Brad,
Bats
how about you?
I give it 3.5.
Okay, I give it 2. And I want to end this on a more positive note, just hopes for Matt Reeves the Batman. Because I love Matt Reeves. We were discussing it before we started recording. I think Matt Reeves is so fantastic, and his attachment to the project is what made me really, really excited about it. And then they started like Robert Pattinson, Paul Dano, Jeffrey Wright, all these amazing people. But I think there was a cynicism for me of like, after you have somebody like Nolan create this very definitive cinematic statements for this character, it feels pretty iconic, and it's hard to top that. How do we feel about Matt Reeves coming in and doing that? Is there excitement there? Do we think there are angles that haven't been looked at for this character that we might see in the Batman? Or how are we feeling? Brad, how do you feel?
I always think there are angles and tones that you can explore with this character because he's been explored so many different ways already. So, like for me, like Batman is somebody that I would like to see restaged every year, the way that a Shakespearean play is restaged every year. Like I'll never get tired of people doing their own spins on Batman. I love Matt Reeves. I think his films are extremely well done. I liked a lot about what he was saying influence wise going into the Batman. He talking about Darwin Cook's ego as an influence, and Robert Pattinson's been going around discussing Batman Shaman and Batman the Damned and all these really obscure Batman titles. Like, I love all of that. When I watch the trailer, it feels a little more of the same to me. Like, I don't
Yeah,
love the trailer.
I like there was one trailer I watched where a buddy of mine said, "Yeah, it looks good, but there's literally nothing we haven't seen in every other Batman movie." And I was like, that's a fair point. Like I agree with you. And I think Brad, you've said this and I've used this quoting you,
Yeah.
but Batman is such a rich character that, like, yeah, you can do the Adam West version. You can do the Christopher Nolan version. There's so many different interpretations. And I think Matt Reeves is one of the smartest, the best filmmakers out there, and that's what makes me excited. But there is a part of me that, like you said, hearing these references but then seeing this, it's a lot of year one stuff, there's a
Yeah.
lot of Long Halloween stuff. These are the things that we're so used to seeing referenced in regards to Batman, rightfully so, because they're so iconic and they're great. But also, after the Dark Knight trilogy, there is a part of me that's like, okay, I I'm very curious to see what we're going to do that's going to differentiate it. But Aaron, how do you feel about Matt Reeves? Are you looking forward to the Batman? Do you think is there a chance it can hold a candle to the Dark Knight trilogy?
Oh, definitely looking forward to it. I do really enjoy Matt Reeves, and he's only grown on me more and more with each movie. I think I'm way more interested in just seeing Robert Pattinson take on the character. I really
Yes.
like the styling of everything. I know it does kind of harken to more of the Nolan Batman styling, but there's something that seems a bit more noirish about it, a bit more like they're going to focus on trying to solve something as a detective as opposed to
Yeah.
just punching. I think there is going to be some punching, but and this one kind of feels like they're going to. I mean, again, they have a great murderers row of supporting cast that's surrounding him, just like Nolan did. Like you said, Jeffrey Wright and Andy Serkis, taking on those bits of the the more positive side of the Batman. So I'm looking forward to that. Um, so yeah, no, I think I'm just ready to see another interpretation. I'm not sure, you know, it's always hard to see like what other stylings of the Batman that we can get. Obviously, everything is kind of influenced by something else that's been in our heads, and so we're kind of
Yeah.
it's like how far in the camp do we go, and how far into seriousness do we go? And this seems kind of like a happy medium somewhere of where our I guess comic book movies are right now.
Yeah. I think that's the thing about Batman. despite all the interpretations you can do, what we gravitate towards and what seems to be the most compelling is this darker, more serious, grounded version of the character. And I think in general, if we all were polled and like you had to pick what's your favorite interpretation, we'd all gravitate towards that, just because there's so much more depth and so much room to explore with that interpretation of the character. So while it's, I don't want to say frustrating, I guess it's not even concerning. Like, I'm genuinely excited. I think this is going to be a great film, and I think it does have some room to be a great film. It just is coming in the wake of a unique and unparalleled cinematic expression. Like, Nolan made a definitive cinematic statement that is like held in such high regard that you.
But Sean, it's actually coming in the wake of Batfleck, right? And we're going to
Oh my
get more
God, don't remind
Batfleck,
me.
and we're going to get Michael Keaton Batman in the Flash film, and so like we're in this really saturated period of Batman that we have really not been free of the character since 2005.
It's true. That's very, very true. And I appreciate that Matt Reeves. We'll see if this sticks, because I still think there's a world in which, like, even though I didn't like the Joker movie, I am still like, Joaquin Phoenix and Robert Pattinson. That I kind of am here
No,
for.
God, no.
I think but I also appreciate Reeves like taking a stand and saying, I don't want this to be connected. I don't want this to be beholden to that. Batman has always felt kind of the standout in the DC universe, where like whenever you had him next to Superman, I was like, I don't want to see that. And like the Marvel movies, it works a little bit better, but because Batman is so dark and
Well, you don't want to see, like, to me, again, like you would have to tailor the Batman for that situation, right? Like,
right. And I
and that's how it's, that's how it's always been. We would have said that about
yeah,
Thor and Iron Man, until we saw it done properly.
that's true. So there's that. And I think for me, cinema, I get very picky about it, because I want there to be, I don't want to see countless reboots. And, in the past, I mean, this century, we've had 3 different Spider-Men. We've had 3 different Batmen. Like, there's a part of me that kind of, it gets exhausting, and it all turns into, okay, well, who's making it? Who's in it? And I think that's where this one is kind of, it's got my attention. I love the talent involved. I think there are story opportunities, and I'm very curious to see if they can. I think this does have the potential to be a great film in its own right, in the same way that Nolan's Batman was.
I feel like
But
every movie should be a Batman movie. Let's stop making not Batman movies.
I agree. Well, guys, I think, is there anything else we want to say about Dark Knight? How does this rank for you guys? I want to hear this, because I've made it no secret how I feel about the Burton Schumacher movies. But like, where does the Dark Knight? Brad, you said Batman Begins is your favorite. How do you rank these with the Burton movies?
I don't think I've actually done like a Batman ranking, but I should do that. I'm gonna try to do it right now. Here we go.
Try to do it right now. Go for it.
Batman Mask of the Phantasm, number 1. Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, Batman Returns, Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, then Batman 89, then
I'm not hearing Batman 66 in this list.
No,
and
you're not.
It should already have been
You're
named.
not. I like the television show a lot. I don't love the Batman the movie. I think it's fun, but it doesn't quite live up to the 2 seasons of that TV show, or the 3 seasons of that TV show. And then I would put Batman Forever, The Dark Knight Rises, Batman and
Thank
Robin.
you. This has
and
been
Justice League.
my whole argument in life is that Batman Forever is a better Batman movie than The Dark Knight Rises. So I appreciate that ranking. Aaron, what about you? How did, like, because I know you're a big fan of the Burton movies. Is The Dark Knight the best to you? Do you rank it higher than 89er Returns, or how do you feel?
I think I'll put Dark Knight at the top. I'll follow that with Batman Returns. Then give it to, I don't know, Batman Begins.
It starts
and
to
then
get really
Batman-
messy.
I don't know. Like, I'll give you a top 5. I'm going to throw Lego Batman in there.
Okay, all right.
Of course, my hottest take from the last Batman episode: Batman and Robin is better than Batman Forever. All right, we can end it.
Oh my god.
Night, guys.
I will say, Batman, the 1966 movie, does make it into my top 10 or my top 5. I mean, there are about 10 Batman movies.
I mean, I probably would too. I forgot about it. Okay.
I would say Batman
Brad just doesn't
Begins-
want to admit when he's wrong or missed something. He's like, yeah, no, I meant to not have it there.
I would Batman Begins is my favorite, then Dark Knight, then Mask of the Phantasm, then Batman 66. Then I don't know if this counts, but I'm counting it. The Batman Superman movie, the animated film. I would rank that as my number 5. Then Batman Forever, then 89, then The Dark Knight Rises, then Batman Returns, Batman and Robin, and then I guess if Justice League counts, and then Batman v Superman at the.
I don't know where Batman Returns was on your list, but that's far too low. Wherever it was, that's all I can. That's all I can tell.
Well, guys, I love talking with you two. I love talking about Batman with you two. And I thank you for putting up with my ranting and raving about The Dark Knight Rises. Brad, if people want to find you out there on the internet, where can they find you? Tell the good people at home about all the awesome stuff you're doing.
You can find me on all social medias at MouthDork. If you are interested in Batman-related stuff, for Film School Rejects, I'm putting together a Batman reading list to the best Batman comics to enjoy alongside Matt Reeves' The Batman. I'm doing a Batman ending explainer. I'm doing a Batman unanswered questions article. I'm doing the best Batman comic you don't know about article that I just finished writing this afternoon.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Aaron's audio has cut out. So on his behalf, I will let you know that he is at a Cool Hand Fluke on social media. I believe on Letterboxd as well. And I am at Shondorman on Twitter. I'm Shondorman05 on Letterboxd. Please don't at me about The Dark Knight Rises. Please don't yell at me.
I think we've angered everyone. Like, we've angered the people who are like diehard Dark Knight fans, and then the people who like The Dark Knight Rises, we've angered them.
I gave The Dark Knight 5 stars. I hope everyone is happy about it. But thank you guys again. Always a pleasure. We may need to consider regrouping for the Batman. I don't know.
Into it.
Again, thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you at the movies.